This was supposed to feel like a goodbye that stayed with you forever. The kind of moment wrestling fans talk about years later, where everything slows down, emotions hit all at once, and you know you've just witnessed the end of an era. Instead, what many fans felt was something far more confusing. Not just sadness, not just nostalgia, but an uncomfortable sense that the moment didn't quite land the way it should have. It felt unfinished, almost awkward, like a sentence that stopped halfway through. You could hear it in the building. That initial silence wasn't reverence, it wasn't respectful awe, it was shock. The kind where people look around, waiting for something else to happen, waiting for the moment to correct itself. For a career as massive as John Cena's, that silence said more than cheers ever could. This was a goodbye that people expected to feel emotional and complete, yet what they got was uncertainty. And uncertainty is a strange thing to pair with a farewell. For so many fans, John Cena isn't just another wrestler who passed through WWE. He's tied to childhood memories, to long nights watching pay-per-views, to the idea of perseverance that WWE spent decades drilling into its audience. When someone like that leaves, fans don't just say goodbye to the performer, they say goodbye to a version of themselves. That's why expectations were so high, and that's why the emotional disconnect hurt more than it would have for anyone else. What made this moment even more unsettling was the lack of closure. No clear emotional release, no definitive sense of finality, just a crowd trying to process what they had seen in real time. Some fans were quiet. Some were frustrated, others were already questioning how they were supposed to feel. That emotional conflict is the real story here, and it's worth understanding. John Cena isn't just another name on a long list of WWE legends, and that's what makes this moment hit differently. His career didn't simply run alongside wrestling history, it actively shaped it for an entire generation. For more than 2 decades, he was a constant presence, someone fans could rely on to be there year after year, whether they loved him, hated him, or went through every phase in between. That kind of longevity does something powerful. It turns a performer into a fixture of people's lives. For many fans, John Cena was there before they fully understood wrestling. He was there when they were kids, chanting along, believing in heroes, and learning what the phrase "never give up" was supposed to mean. As those fans grew older, Cena stayed. He became part of their teenage years, their adulthood, and eventually their sense of nostalgia. That shared timeline creates an emotional bond that goes far beyond wins and losses. Cena's importance isn't just measured in championships or main events. It's measured in cultural impact. He crossed over into movies, television, and mainstream media without ever fully leaving wrestling behind. Even when he wasn't on weekly TV, his presence lingered. He represented WWE to the outside world, and in many ways, he represented wrestling fans themselves. That kind of visibility gave people a sense of pride in being fans. The never give up identity wasn't just a slogan. For a lot of viewers, it became a personal mantra tied to a specific time in their lives. Cena was the guy who kept getting back up, who absorbed the boos, the criticism, and the pressure, and still showed up the same way. Watching him succeed felt validating, especially for fans who felt overlooked or underestimated in their own lives. That's why this goodbye carries so much emotional weight. It doesn't feel like losing a wrestler. It feels like closing a chapter that ran quietly alongside people's own growth. When John Cena steps away, he takes with him years of memories, routines, and emotional touchstones. And when something that constant disappears, it naturally leaves people feeling unsteady, reflective, and deeply emotional. This connection explains why reactions to his farewell are so intense and so personal. Fans aren't reacting as consumers of a product, they're reacting as people protecting a memory. Cena represented effort, resilience, and belief during moments when fans needed those ideas the most. When someone like that leaves without emotional clarity, it unsettles people. It forces them to confront time passing, change happening, and the uncomfortable reality that some eras don't get perfect endings. That realization is difficult, bittersweet, and impossible to ignore for longtime fans around the world today. Wrestling crowds have always been honest in a way no scripted segment ever can be. They react before they think, and that instinctive response is often the clearest indicator of how a moment truly lands. That is why the reaction to John Cena's farewell matters so much. The most striking thing wasn't loud boos or deafening cheers. It was the pause, that stretch of silence where thousands of people sat frozen, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. Silence in wrestling is uncomfortable because it isn't supposed to happen. This is an environment built on noise, chants, and constant feedback. When that disappears, it signals confusion rather than agreement. In this case, the crowd wasn't unified in anger. They were processing. Some expected an emotional send-off, others expected defiance, resilience, or one final triumphant moment. What they received didn't align cleanly with any of those expectations, and the audience reaction reflected that disconnect in real time. As the moment settled, the silence slowly gave way to scattered boos, then louder expressions of frustration. That delay is important. Immediate boos would have suggested rejection. Immediate cheers would have meant acceptance. The hesitation in between revealed conflict. Fans were torn between respect for John Cena and disappointment in how the moment unfolded. That emotional tug-of-war played out audibly in the arena, and it became impossible to ignore. Wrestling crowds function as emotional truth detectors because they have no incentive to perform politeness. They respond based on feeling, not narrative obligation. In this case, their reaction told a deeper story than any commentary ever could. They weren't rejecting Cena, they were reacting to the loss of emotional clarity. They wanted to feel something definitive, and instead they were left unsure of how to react. That uncertainty is why the reaction lingered in people's minds. Silence forces reflection. It invites viewers at home to question what they are seeing and how they are supposed to interpret it. When fans watching remotely heard that quiet, they felt it too. It validated their own confusion and reinforced that this wasn't just a personal reaction. It was shared. In many ways, the crowd became the voice of the audience at large. Their hesitation mirrored what countless fans felt internally. They respected the career, they understood the intent, but they struggled with the execution. That tension between appreciation and dissatisfaction shaped how this farewell will be remembered. Long after the match itself fades, people will recall that moment of silence, because it captured the emotional complexity of saying goodbye when the goodbye doesn't come with the closure everyone expected. And that is why this reaction matters beyond one night or one match. It reframed the entire moment. Instead of a clean farewell, it became a question mark in wrestling history, defined by feeling rather than intention, by emotion rather than explanation, leaving fans still talking, still debating, and still searching for meaning in what was supposed to be simple and final for a legend of his magnitude. The backlash didn't come from John Cena losing. That part alone was never the real issue. Most fans had already accepted that a final match doesn't always need a fairytale ending. Losing can make sense. Passing the torch can make sense. Even heartbreak can make sense. What didn't make sense to many people was how it happened, and more importantly, how it felt in that moment. A tap out carries a very specific emotional meaning in wrestling. It isn't just defeat, it's surrender. It's the visual language of giving in, of saying you have nothing left. For most wrestlers, that's fine. For John Cena, whose entire identity was built around endurance, refusal, and resilience, it felt jarring. Fans didn't see a warrior finally overwhelmed. They saw a moment that contradicted decades of emotional conditioning. That disconnect is what sparked the backlash. Even fans who were perfectly fine with Cena losing struggled to reconcile the method. A pinfall would have felt final but familiar. Passing out would have felt tragic yet consistent. A tap out, especially delivered so calmly, broke the emotional contract fans had with the character they'd followed for years. It wasn't anger at the result, it was discomfort with the symbolism. When people compare this farewell to other historic wrestling goodbyes, the difference becomes clearer. Ric Flair lost, but he fought until there was nothing left. Shawn Michaels lost, but the story emphasized respect and completion. The Undertaker's final moments, flawed as they were, still leaned into legacy and myth. Those endings aligned with who those characters were. They felt emotionally truthful even when imperfect. John Cena's ending didn't feel emotionally aligned in the same way. The match ended, but the story didn't feel complete. Fans were left searching for meaning instead of absorbing closure. That gap between expectation and reality created frustration, because wrestling fans are trained to read endings symbolically. They look for narrative payoff, especially in retirement moments. When that payoff doesn't arrive, the reaction is visceral. This is where the sense of injustice creeps in. Not because Cena deserved to win, but because fans felt the goodbye didn't honor the emotional journey they had invested in. It felt less like a conclusion and more like an interruption. The moment came and went without giving people the release they were expecting, and that absence lingered. Backlash often grows in the space between what fans are prepared for and what they receive. Here, expectations were shaped by history, memory, and emotional attachment. When the ending violated those expectations, it didn't just disappoint, it unsettled. And once that feeling set in, it needed somewhere to go, transforming confusion into criticism and turning an already emotional farewell into a deeply divisive moment that fans are still trying to process. In moments like this, emotion outweighs logic every time. Wrestling lives and dies on how moments resonate, not how they are justified afterward. That is why explanations, defenses, or business reasoning struggle to change how fans feel. Once an ending lands the wrong way emotionally, it becomes fixed in memory. For John Cena, a figure defined by emotional consistency, that mismatch felt especially sharp, and it ensured that this ending would be debated not for what it achieved, but for what it failed to deliver to its audience worldwide. When sadness doesn't find resolution, it often transforms into frustration. That shift is exactly what happened here. Fans didn't leave this moment simply feeling emotional or reflective. They left feeling unsettled, and unsettled emotions look for direction. In wrestling, that direction almost always points upward, toward decision makers, toward authority figures, toward the people perceived to have control over how moments are shaped. This is where the conversation naturally moved away from John Cena and toward management. Not because fans wanted someone to blame, but because wrestling teaches its audience to look behind the curtain. Fans understand that outcomes are deliberate, that emotions are engineered, and that endings are choices. When an ending feels emotionally misaligned, people assume someone chose that path and frustration attaches itself there. Triple H became the focal point of that frustration not because he is universally disliked, but because he represents creative authority in this era. He symbolizes the promise of thoughtful storytelling, emotional payoff, and respect for legacy. When those expectations aren't met, disappointment feels sharper. It's not anger rooted in hatred, it's frustration rooted in broken trust. Fans believed this era would handle moments like this with care, and when the result didn't reflect that belief, it created cognitive dissonance. It's important to acknowledge nuance here. Many fans are not rejecting the idea of Cena losing, nor are they dismissing the intent behind the decision. What they are reacting to is the emotional execution. That distinction matters. This isn't outrage for outrage's sake. It's fans trying to reconcile their emotional investment with an outcome that didn't honor the internal logic they had built over decades of watching. This is also where validation becomes essential. Fans aren't overreacting, they're not misunderstanding the business. Their reaction makes sense given the emotional weight of the moment. Wrestling thrives on emotional contracts between performer and audience, and when those contracts feel breached, frustration is a rational response. Acknowledging that doesn't inflame the situation, it contextualizes it. As frustration builds, it often finds release through chants, criticism, or pointed commentary. That release isn't inherently negative. It's part of how fans process disappointment collectively. It allows them to express that something mattered to them enough to hurt when it didn't land correctly. Indifference would be far worse. Frustration, in this sense, is evidence of deep emotional engagement. What makes this moment complex is that the frustration doesn't erase respect. Fans can honor John Cena's career while still questioning how his goodbye was handled. They can appreciate the broader vision while criticizing the execution. Those feelings can coexist, and for many people they do. In the end, this shift from sadness to frustration tells us something important. It shows that fans still care deeply about emotional storytelling. They still believe wrestling moments should feel right, not just make sense on paper. And when that belief is challenged, the response isn't silence forever. It's conversation, debate, and reflection. That ongoing dialogue is the true legacy of moments like this, because it proves that even in frustration, the emotional bond between wrestling and its audience remains very much alive. One of the reasons this moment continues to linger is because it didn't feel final. Wrestling has trained its audience to question endings, especially when those endings arrive without emotional closure. Over the years, fans have learned that goodbye in wrestling often means something far more flexible than it does anywhere else. Farewells blur, final matches become chapters instead of conclusions. That history makes it difficult to accept any ending at face value, particularly when it feels incomplete. This uncertainty creates a strange emotional tension. On one hand, fans understand reality. Time passes, bodies change. Careers end, John Cena has earned the right to step away on his own terms. On the other hand, wrestling thrives on the idea that nothing is ever truly over. Legends return, one more match happens, one last moment gets added. That push and pull between acceptance and hope keeps people emotionally invested long after the lights go down. What complicates things further is the ambiguity surrounding this moment. There was no definitive emotional punctuation mark, no clear statement that this was absolutely it. The lack of clarity leaves space for interpretation, and that space naturally fills with speculation. Not the loud, click-driven kind, but the quiet kind that lives in fans' minds. The kind that wonders if a different ending could still exist somewhere down the line. Wrestling history reinforces this mindset. Careers thought to be finished have restarted countless times. Farewells have been revised, extended, and reframed. Fans remember those moments, and memory shapes expectation. When Cena's goodbye didn't provide emotional certainty, it reopened the door to possibility, even if only slightly. That possibility doesn't require belief, it simply requires doubt. This is where hope quietly settles in. Not the kind that demands a return, but the kind that allows fans to imagine a better sense of closure someday. Hope doesn't always mean another match. Sometimes it means another moment, another acknowledgement, or another chance for the story to end in a way that feels emotionally true. Wrestling's strength lies in its ability to revisit and reshape its own history, and fans know that. At the same time, reality tempers that hope. Cena's career outside the ring continues to grow. His appearances are rare and meaningful precisely because they are limited. Fans understand that waiting forever isn't realistic. That balance between hope and acceptance creates soft suspense. It keeps the conversation alive without making promises that can't be kept, and perhaps that's why this moment refuses to settle. It exists in between, not fully over, not clearly continuing. That ambiguity may frustrate some, but it also ensures that John Cena's goodbye remains emotionally active rather than neatly archived, allowing fans to carry it forward, still questioning, still feeling, and still caring about what comes next. John Cena's goodbye isn't just about one wrestler stepping away. It reflects something larger about where WWE is today and how it handles moments that carry deep emotional weight. Modern WWE is constantly balancing two forces, honoring the past while pushing forward into the future. That balance is difficult, especially when nostalgia isn't just a marketing tool, but a genuine emotional bond shared by millions of fans. Cena's farewell highlights how much audiences still crave emotional payoff. Spectacle alone isn't enough. Fans want moments that feel earned, moments that respect the history they've invested in. When that payoff feels unclear, it sparks conversation not because people want to complain, but because they care enough to analyze and reflect. That engagement is a sign of trust, even when it comes with criticism. This moment also shows that WWE's storytelling choices don't exist in a vacuum. Fans bring decades of memory with them. They remember how past legends were treated, how stories concluded, and how those endings made them feel. When something feels misaligned, it stands out more sharply because expectations are rooted in experience. Cena's goodbye became a mirror, reflecting both the strengths and the growing pains of modern WWE storytelling. What matters most is that the emotional response wasn't manufactured. It was real. Fans reacted because they felt something meaningful was at stake. That reaction deserves recognition, not dismissal. It proves that wrestling still has the power to move people, to spark debate, and to connect audiences through shared emotion. In the end, John Cena's legacy doesn't hinge on one night or one decision. It lives in the memories fans carry forward. Their reactions, their conversations, and even their frustrations are part of that legacy. By engaging with those emotions, fans reclaim ownership of the moment. And that, perhaps more than any scripted ending, is what ensures John Cena's place in wrestling history remains secure, relevant, and deeply human.